Okay. Uh, Chapter 6 of How the Irish Saved Civilization. What was found? So, page 147, first paragraph. Patrick was a hard-bitten man who did not find his life's purpose till his life was half over. He had a temper that could flare dangerously when he perceived an injustice, not against himself, but against another, particularly against someone defenseless, but he had the cheerfulness and good humor that humble people often have. He enjoyed this world and this variety of human beings, and he didn't take himself too seriously. He was in spirit an Irishman. Supreme egotism and utter seriousness are necessary for the greatest accomplishment, and these the Irish find hard to sustain. The Irish find it hard to be egotistical and serious. So they find it hard to achieve great things. At some point, the instinct to see life in a comic light becomes irresistible, and ambition falls before it. So seriousness and egotism, not really the Irish traits, and how do you accomplish great things without the two as a culture? And yet, something happens here. Page 148. First full paragraph. Patrick's gift to the Irish was his Christianity. The first de-Romanized Christianity in human history. So the first there it is. A Christianity without the socio-political baggage of the Greco-Roman world. So Patrick brings over a Christianity that doesn't include all the political baggage and the political motives and connivings of the Roman Empire. He just brings the pure thing itself, as much as that's possible. A Christianity that completely enculturated itself into the Irish scene. Though the Edict of Milan, which had legalized the new religion in 313 and made it the new emperor's pet, Christianity had been received into Rome, not Rome into Christianity. In other words, Christianity, when the Roman emperor made it the official state religion, Christianity, Cahill argues, was kind of sucked into the Roman Empire. It's not that Roman life and the empire were sucked into Christianity. It was Christianity was sucked in to the Roman Empire and just made another part of it, is what Cahill argues. Roman culture was not altered much by the exchange, and it is arguable that Christianity lost much of its distinctiveness by becoming the state religion of the Roman Empire. But in the patrician exchange, in Patrick's bringing Christianity to Ireland, lacking the power and the traditions of Rome, Ireland had been received into Christianity, which transformed Ireland into something new, something never seen before, a Christian culture where slavery and human sacrifice became unthinkable, and warfare, though impossible for humans to completely eradicate, diminished markedly. The Irish, in any case, loved physical combat too much for intertribal warfare to disappear completely. Unlike with Roman culture, which kind of absorbs Christianity, Christianity, when it hits Ireland, absorbs Irish culture. Again, as Cahill's arguing here. 149. He makes this interesting little note here at the bottom of that first big paragraph. He says, and the belief grew strong that the one thing the devil cannot bear is laughter. The Irish were people of laughter, and they were like, laughter means you're good at having a good, fun time, and that drives the devil nuts because God wants people to know the pleasure and the joy of this life that he's created for us around us. The devil is a killjoy, and so here, Cahill is like, the devil can't stand laughter, and it's just an interesting little note that Cahill throws in there. Page 150, bottom of 150, last three lines. Patrick, the incomplete Roman, Patrick is from the Roman Empire, but after spending so many years in Ireland, he just comes back and he doesn't fit in the Roman Empire anymore. He's got to go back to Ireland. yeah, I kind of relate to him that way. After having spent 10 years in China, there's still many things about being back in America that I'm just like, it just feels awkward a lot of the time, because I feel like a big part of me is formed in a culture that's kind of foreign to this culture. Patrick, the incomplete Roman, nevertheless understood that though Christianity is not inextricably wedded to Roman custom, it could not survive without Roman literacy. So one thing the Romans had that Patrick knew the Irish needed if Christianity was going to catch on was literacy. They needed to be able to read and study, right? So they could learn more about the faith. So he was like, there is something that Rome has to offer that we don't have here, and that's literacy. And so the first Irish Christians also became the first Irish literates. Page 151. Ireland is unique in religious history for being the only land in which Christianity was introduced without bloodshed. I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, that would take some research, but it's a very interesting point if it's true. And Cahill argues that point here, or at least he makes the statement. He doesn't necessarily argue it. There are no Irish martyrs, at least not till Elizabeth I began to create them 11 centuries after Patrick. And this lack of martyrdom troubled the Irish. Martyr, a person who dies for their beliefs, right? To whom a glorious death by violence presented such an exciting finale. In the Irish personality was this idea, it's kind of cool to die violently, And so the Irish were sort of bothered, that Christianity comes into their country so peacefully because, they don't get to burn anybody at the stake. They don't get to drown any, it's and so they need some way to be martyrs, What's the answer to this? 151, second full paragraph. The Irish of the late 5th and early 16th centuries soon found a solution which they called the green martyrdom, opposing it to the conventional red martyrdom by blood. The green martyrs were those who, leaving behind the comforts and pleasures of ordinary human society, retreated to the woods or to a mountaintop or to a lonely island, to one of the green no-man's lands outside tribal jurisdiction, there to study the scriptures and communicate with God. For among the story collections Patrick gave them, they found the examples of the anchorites of the Egyptian desert who, also lacking the purification rite of persecution, there was precedent for this in Egypt with some famous Christian believers who also weren't facing persecution. So they were like, what can we do to suffer? We'll go live alone in the desert. So this is, that could be called the yellow martyrdom, but this is the green martyrdom. They go out to live by themselves in nature as a way of being like a martyr, a living martyr. Page 155. The change in tone and content. So he goes and writes all of this poetry written by hermits he throws at us, and then after that poetry, the change in tone and content from the blood-laying of the Táin to the quiet delights of the hermit's song. So they go off to be hermits, to live in caves and stuff by themselves, and to study the Bible, to learn. The contrast between the old bloody classic, the Táin, the Irish epic, and the kind of poetry these hermits start writing is interesting. Humor is abundant in both literatures. Humor is part of the Irish personality. But the harsh humor of the mythological cycle, like the Táin, has been changed into a kind of self-mocking monastic mirth. The monk's humor is more just laughing at themselves and how silly human nature is, right? Moving down that middle paragraph on 155, everything about Cuchulainn was larger than life. Everything about the hermit is endearingly small. The colors of the Táin were gleaming metals and in constant shadows, constantly changing shadows. The world of the hermit, with this new belief system, shines with a light that bathes each object, so that all items stand out distinctly and substantially in their own rich colors, like miniature pictures in an early gospel book. Brightness is the central experience here, and such concepts as clarity, cleanliness, illumination, fairness fill the hermit's poem. and it kind of the opposite filled the tame, in the pagan Irish literature. So the wished for extremes of the green martyrdom were largely and quickly abandoned in favor of monasticism, a movement which, though it could support and even nurture oddity and eccentricity, subjected such tendencies to a social contract. Since Ireland had no cities, these monastic establishments grew rapidly into the first population centers, hubs of unprecedented prosperity, art, and learning. So basically, after a while, the green martyrdom kind of fails because ultimately the Irish are just too social for that to catch on. So they start coming back to live basically in monasteries and live together in monasteries. And the monasteries become Ireland's first cities, basically. Page 156, here's a little illustration showing what like an early Irish monastery might have looked like. What it did look like early Irish monasteries. Page 157. And remember, as we're looking at this chapter is about, the last chapter was about, so how did Ireland become a Christian culture? This chapter is, how did they save civilization? We read about what was found, what was lost back when the Roman Empire collapsed. Now we're reading about what gets found as Ireland, as they save civilization, so to speak. We're finally at what the book is supposedly about, right? It's taken a while. Okay, page 157. Last paragraph. Soon enough, even the level shore of the upper lake, people began to come from all over Ireland to sit at the feet of the monks and learn all they had to teach. So people are traveling from all over Ireland to these monasteries where the monks live, because the monks are the ones who now have this education in the classics from books that Patrick has brought over and stuff when he came over. Remember, this is what Rome does have to offer, even though they don't want Rome's political and social control, right? But it's got education and literacy to offer them. So people traveling from all over Ireland to come meet these monks and learn how to read and write from them and study and get an education from them. These monks that are Patrick's followers. On a plain to the east of the lower lake, bottom of 157, the monks built what would become in time a kind of university city, to which came thousands of hopeful students, first from all over Ireland, then from England, and at last from everywhere in Europe. People come to Ireland, to this university city built by the monks that were Patrick's followers. Never forgetting the prehistoric Irish virtue of heroic hospitality. Even, pre-Christian, hospitality is a very important trait of Irish culture. The monks turned no one away, as is confirmed in this description of a typical university city. Going down on 158, so hospitality, no one gets turned away. Yeah, well, 158, the top there. Many of the nobles of the English nation and lesser men also had set out thither, forsaking their native island either for the grace of sacred learning or a more austere life. Some of them indeed soon dedicated themselves faithfully to the monastic life. Others rejoiced rather to give themselves to learning, going about from one master's or one monk's cell to another. All these the Irish willingly received and saw to it to supply them food day by day without cost and books for their studies and teaching free of charge. So this is a free university. If you come here to study, the monks will give you free meals, free lodging, free teaching, and you get a free textbook. Although often the free textbook means you have to hand copy your own textbook, but you get all of this, right? It's a pretty impressive deal. Last paragraph on 158. Irish generosity extended not only to a variety of people, but to a variety of ideas. As unconcerned about orthodoxy of thought as they were about uniformity of monastic practice, they brought into their libraries everything they could lay their hands on. They were resolved to shut out nothing. And so the Irish are so fascinated with learning. They're like, whoa, suddenly we're literate and suddenly we can read stuff. And so suddenly, they're reading and studying the Bible, but now they're grasping after more. and they're bringing in all the Greek and Roman classics and stuff, you know, not just religious stuff. Page 159, 6 lines down. In their unrestrained Catholicity, they shocked conventional churchmen who had been trained to value Christian literature principally and give a wide berth to the dubious morality of the pagan classics. Last paragraph on 159. It was not that the Irish were uncritical, that they just blindly accepted anything they got their hands on. It's just that they saw no value in self-imposed censorship. You know, last paragraph, 159. Though the time-worn tales of Greece and Rome were fresh and fascinating to them, the Irish monks could occasionally take a dimmer view of their own literature. So the Irish are just grasping after all the literature they can find and copying it. And that's how they're preserving Roman literature and Greek literature, which has almost disappeared along with Latin literature with the fall of the Roman Empire. Over in Ireland, they're making tons and tons of hand-copied copies of all this stuff. They're preserving it. They're building back up this library of stuff that's been wiped out in mainland Europe. But down at bottom 159, the time-worn tales of Greece and Rome were fresh and fascinating. The Irish monks, they tended to kind of look down on their own stories and their own culture a bit. Hey, oh, Teddy, out, please. Hold on 1 minute. Hold on 1 minute. Hey, I got work, Ted. I love you. I love you, Ted. Sorry for the, yeah. So, page 160. In the Book of Leinster, which contains a florid version of the Táin, the epic ends with a monastic Amen, after which the scribe wrote down in Irish the earlier oral culture's bardic formula. A blessing on everyone who will memorize the Táin faithfully in this form and not put any other form on it. Just after this, in Latin, the same scribe left this succinct critique. I, who copied down this story, or miraculously fantasy, he's like, okay, the Táin, it's really just a fantasy that we Irish came up with in our pre-Christian days. So even though he takes the time to copy the Táin down for us, thank heavens, or we wouldn't have it. Right after he's copied it down, he makes the remark, but it's really kind of inferior, you know. Do not credit the details of the story or fantasy. Some things in it are devilish lies, and some are poetical figments. Some seem possible and others not. Some are the enjoyment of idiots. So as an Irishman, he kind of looks down on his own culture, his own literature and stuff, you know. Middle paragraph of 160. So, though he disapproved of its contents, he still copied it out. It is thanks to such scribes, however cranky their glosses may sometimes be, that we have the rich trove of early Irish literature, the earliest vernacular literature of Europe survived, because it was taken seriously enough to be written down. Though these early Irish literats were intensely interested in the worlds opened up to them by the three sacred languages of Greek, Latin, and in rudimentary form Hebrew, they loved their own tongue too much ever to stop using it. Whereas elsewhere in Europe, no educated man would be caught dead speaking a vernacular, like common language. The Irish thought that all language was a game, and too much fun to be deprived of any part of it. They were still too childlike and playful to find any value in snobbery. Last 2 lines of 160. The bored scribblings, like mixed in with all of this high Latin language and Greek and Roman classics, we find the bored scribblings of the Irish scribes who kept themselves awake by writing out a verse or two of a beloved Irish poem. And so, by accumulation, left for our enjoyment a whole literature that would otherwise be unknown. Sometimes the scribe may be composing his own lyric, for all we know, and often enough he is likely to have been a student, not always, given the character of his daydreams, a boy headed for a monastic vocation. And so, yeah, you know, so the Irish, as they're translating all of this great literature, they're also doodling in the margins. They're writing poetry. they're also copying down their own stories from their own Irish culture and stuff. And i.e. they're connecting, they're doing the prior knowledge thing some of you learned about in school. You know, they're reading Shakespeare and they're like, oh, this reminds me of, and then they write something. Or, oh, this makes me want to write a poem, and they write the poem in the margin. And so as a result of this, they're interacting with what they're reading. They're interacting with the text. This is ideally what you get out of a university education. What you read, what you study, whether it's history, literature, art, you take it and you react to it. You write poems about it. You see a famous painting and you make another painting, reacting to that painting. You like have this back and forth discussion with your education in your classes, and you create something new, and 100 years from now, people look and they learn something about you as they're studying this stuff that you were studying, right? You're adding to this, you know, this thing that is building, that's growing. That's what these Irish monks are doing. Because of what happens later, we wouldn't know anything about Irish culture. We wouldn't know about the Táin or any of that if they hadn't preserved it, if they hadn't doodled in the margins of these textbooks, that they were actually hand copying the textbooks and then they were doodling in the margins, right? So education is about developing this conversation, developing ideas, bringing your perspectives to the perspectives of others, right? It's also about preserving what you think for others to find out about later, preserving your culture for others to find out about. So just as the Irish are preserving ancient Greek and Roman culture by copying out these books, they're also preserving their own culture for the future. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, this is what your education ought to be like, ideally, as you're in, you know, going through the university. All right. Page 161, bottom 161. Well, they also pick on each other and get frustrated and annoyed as they're studying, just like you do. One scribe will complain of the back-breaking work of book copying. Oh, I hate this paper. It's taking way too long to write. Another of a sloppy fellow scribe. It's easy to spot Gabriel's work here is written in a beautiful hand in the margin of an undistinguished page, right? A third will grind his teeth about the difficulty of the tortured ancient Greek that he is copying. Oh, I hate grammar. I hate math. Why is this so troublesome, right? So you find in their doodling where they're complaining about their classmates, where they're complaining about how hard the grammar is to understand. You know, write in your textbooks, right? Fill them up with your perspective, your notes, and hold on to them. 162, have a conversation with your studies. Middle paragraph 162, perhaps the clearest picture we possess of what it is like to be a scribal scholar is contained in a 4-stanza Irish poem slipped into a 9th century manuscript, which otherwise contains such learned material as a Latin. Okay, there's this poem written by some random dude copying, you know, copying a textbook, and then he gets bored and he writes a little poem in the margin. I and Ponger Bon, my cat. 'Tis a light task we are at. Hunting mice is his delight. Hunting words I sit all night. 'Tis a merry thing to see at our tasks how glad are we, when at home we sit and find entertainment to our mind. 'Gainst the wall he sets his eye, fool and fierce and sharp and sly. 'Gainst the wall of knowledge I all my little wisdom try. So in peace our task we ply, Ponger Bon, my cat, and I. In our arts we find our bliss, I have mine and he has his. It's a poem about a dude and his cat, comparing the two of them to each other. His cat is studying the wall, hunting for the mouse. The dude is studying this text, hunting for the meaning. It really reminds you of Seamus Heaney's poem, Digging, where he's comparing his act of writing poetry to his grandfather and father's acts of digging for potatoes. It's the same kind of thing. You would almost think Seamus Heaney was Irish or something. Ha, imagine that, right? All right, page 163, middle paragraph, third line. They did not see themselves as drones. Rather, they engaged the text they were working on, tried to comprehend it after their fashion, and if possible, add to it, even improve on it. In this dazzling new culture, a book was not an isolated document on a dusty shelf. Book truly spoke to book as they wrote notes back and forth in their books, and writer to scribe and scribe to reader from one generation to the next. These books are, as we would say in today's jargon, open, interfacing, intertextual, a bit of everything from every era, language, and style known to the writer. These were like the web pages of today. You click on a link, it takes you to something else. You click on a link, it takes you to something else. These were these books they were composing. It's full of history, art, literature, whatever they wanted to copy down as they were going through. All of it, they just copied down whatever comes to mind as they were copying down these texts. It's like hyperlinks all the way through these things. 164, halfway, a third of the way down the page. These reluctant script hardly suggest what would happen next, for within a generation the Irish had mastered Latin and even Greek, and as best they could were picking up some Hebrew. As we've already seen, they devised Irish grammars and copied out the whole of their native oral literature. The members of a far-flung secret society formed as early as the late 5th century could write to one another in impenetrably Uritic, never-before-spoken patterns of Latin. Reminds you of like J.R.R. Tolkien making up his own languages for The Lord of the Rings. Next paragraph. Nothing brought out Irish playfulness more than the copying of the books themselves, a task no reader of the ancient world could entirely neglect. You didn't have printing presses. If you wanted a book, you had to copy it out. At the outset, there were in Ireland no just individual hermits and monks, each in his little beehive cell or sitting outside in fine weather, copying a needed text from a borrowed book, old book on one knee, fresh sheepskin pages on the other knee. Page 165, third line down. Why, they ask themselves. So they're just copying, and as they're copying, they're having fun, right? And they're asking funny little questions like, why does a bee look the way a bee looks? Could it look another way? Is there a bee-ness to be? The result of such, why is this guy blue, questions was a new kind of book, the Irish Codex. This is key. And one after another, Ireland began to produce the most spectacular magical books the world had ever seen. The Irish Codexes. Page 165, last paragraph. Go down 4 lines. As late as the 12th century, Geraldus Cambrensis was forced to conclude that the Book of Kells, this is the most famous Irish codex, the Book of Kells was the work of an angel, not of a man. Even today, Nicolette Gray in A History of Lettering can say of its great Chi-Rho page that the Greek characters, the monogram of Christ, are more presences than letters. So if you look in the, right after the cover of the book, look at these 2 pages. These are pages from the Book of Kells. And the Irish started cranking out these incredibly artistic books. They would take a letter, a simple letter B, and be like, what if we turn this B into a work of art? Boom, you know? And so they're just having fun every which way with their education. This is just doodling hardcore, right? Top of 166. For the body of the text, the Irish developed 2 hands, one a dignified but rounded script called Irish half-enuncial, the other an easy-to-write script called Irish minuscule that was more readable, more fluid, and, well, happier than anything devised by the Romans. So they're coming up with different fonts. I mean, that looks like Elvish, you know? It looks like something Tolkien came up with in Lord of the Rings. They're coming up with all these different fonts for writing. And this is all by hand, not the computer making it easy for you, not a click of a button, right? And they're just doing it for the heck of it, because they're having a good time with their education. Imagine that, right? 167, middle paragraph, end of it. Or to recall the most characteristic of all Irish responses when faced with the demand for a plain, unequivocal answer. Well, it is and it isn't. She does and she doesn't. You will and you won't. That's a random thing he throws in there. If you ask an Irish, just tell me the answer. They'll be like, well, yes and no. I don't know why Cahill threw that in there. Read the context, right? 168. First full paragraph. Codex. This term codex, which meant these artistic books the Irish were creating, was used originally to distinguish a book as we know it today from its ancestor. Go down halfway down the page. It is interesting to consider that the shape of the modern book, taller than wide, was determined by the dimensions of a sheepskin, which could most economically be cut into double pages that yield our modern book shape when folded. And so if you're thinking about the way we communicate, the reason we communicate in different formats, used to people wrote everything on a scroll. The Irish create books, and originally they're made with like sheepskins, and the reason today that books are shaped like this is because it was kind of the shape of a sheepskin, you know? And so that even comes down to like, why are web pages shaped the way web pages are shaped and stuff? You know, why are computer monitors the shape that computer monitors are? Think about this. Think about how the way we communicate has developed, the way we express our thoughts for others to see and to read. That might be your paper right there. That might fit into it somehow, or it might not. So on 169, we move to start talking about Columcille. 169, go down 5 lines. After Patrick, Columcille is the most famous Irish figure. He's the most, he's the most famous Irish historical person. And you actually pronounce that Columcille. Columcille. And so let's talk about Columcille. And we're not talking about, Medib and Cuchulainn, yes, they're famous, but conceivably they're, well, no, okay. Let's say Irish Christian, you know. So you've got Patrick. You've got Patrick, and then you've got Columcille. And after Patrick, he's the next most famous, the most famous monk. So Columcille is an intense dude. He loves beautiful things. He kind of had a privileged childhood and grew up like knowing all about art and stuff. On page 170, you get his story. Page 170 and 171. And connected to this story of his is another little war. And it also talks about what Cahill claims is your first example in history of a copyright case. Loosely termed a lawsuit over a copyright issue. But you get Columcille here, who basically gets in trouble for trying to copy out a book that somebody else owns, which is not a very Irish thing to get in trouble for. The monks let people freely copy their books, right? But Columcille's master is not very happy that he's copying his book. And Columcille tries to keep the book, and then they have this big fight, and Columcille ends up getting kicked out of Ireland. He ends up getting exiled, which is a big part of the Irish psyche, the Irish personality, is exile. Whether forced exile, like with Columcille, where he has to leave because he instigates some violence, or whether, for example, with the Irish potato famine, where they were all forced, they were either going to starve or they were going to leave and come to America. And so it's not like they wanted to leave, they had to leave. Exile, being forced because of circumstances or whatever to leave your country behind, to leave the ones you love behind and go into another country, and chances are you'll never be able to return to your own country, right? We see this in Angela's Ashes, right? This kind of thing. Yeah. And so this is Columcille, and Columcille goes out as a monk. So he's exiled, but he also goes out as a believer in Christianity as a monk. You know what? I'm going to pause here, and we're going to divide this chapter into two parts. So this part was part A, and there will be a second part to wrap up this chapter. Talk to you later. Bye.